What's up, everybody? I'm Stan, and welcome to Detail Comics, where we go over comics in detail. This is iReviews, the show where I go over a comic book, its story, its art, give you my impressions, and let you know whether it's something to go back to the comic book shop for or not. So what I want to talk about right now is Damage #1. So this is the debut of DC's New Age of Heroes. We've got art by Tony Daniel, and overall the cover just looks phenomenal, so I can't wait to see what's inside. Is this going to be just another kind of Hulk ripoff in this respect? And I'm talking like Green Hulk, I'm talking Red Hulk, I'm talking Gray Hulk. There's all kinds of different parallels, so let's see what they've got in store for us and how it breaks down. DC's New Age of Heroes, which has evolved from the Dark Matter universe that it was originally announced as, really debuts with Damage #1. And Damage #1 is the start of this artist-driven series of new releases. So the first iconic thing about this is that it's a trifold cover. You know, there's no variants, but there's a little bit of a gimmick when it comes to those kind of things. The first real big deal is that we actually get exposed to a transformation scene on the very first page, which not only tells us that Ethan is the man that is the carrier for Damage, but Damage has a very seriously different personality. And ultimately, it's going to be kind of a combat between these two different characters. The question is, where have we seen this before? And if you're thinking about the Hulk or the Red Hulk or anything along those lines, you're probably in the right vein. And there's actually been a very similar mechanism with this, where a person can get Hulk-like powers for an hour in U.S. Avengers, which was written by Al Ewing on Marvel's side. But I don't want to cheapen the experience of Damage, because when we first see this giant double-page splash of Damage busting out of the Titan that's carrying him, it's just phenomenal. Tony Daniel has done a fantastic job on the art. He's been very experimental, it looks like, when it comes to the actual structure of the panels, and you just can't blame him. The amount of detail that went into this is pretty phenomenal. I'm really happy with how everything looks. The smoke trails, the speed lines, the cityscapes, the actual structure of the character, the action and the sequences is all very interesting. It's very kinetic, and it just lends power to it. Of course, you've got the quintessential Damage versus a soldier fight, where he's kind of coming back, and you find out that he's almost vengeful. He's jealous that he should be Damage. He is the better soldier than Ethan. He should be the one to be Damage. He can be controlled. He can be the menacing master of destruction that is this giant colossus. The one big thing that we see is that it's a little bit light on story. This is giving you a little bit of backstory that's meshed in with this fight sequence, and that's really what it is. It really boils down to the first 12 pages being a giant fight scene where Damage destroys this other soldier before Ethan can kind of stop him. Otherwise, he would have just crushed him like an ant, taking his life. And this is going to be where your central conflict comes, what Damage wants versus what Ethan wants, and how they can kind of get along. Of course, you do run into the situation where Damage just wants to escape. He just doesn't want to be this kind of tool. It's one of those situations where they've got to go, they've got to hide. They can't necessarily be found out about these people. So it becomes almost like a runaway story where he's got to hide, he's got to find a way to protect himself, he's got to find a way to escape this kind of control that the government has him under. We're introduced to Colonel Jonas, and she is the one that's in charge of this particular plan, going through, and they get the backstory. They understand exactly what kind of damage has been done to this area. So that's a central focus. That's where the name comes from. What kind of damage he can do, whether it's a domestic urban area or not. And you even get a very overt play into the name of, what she was understanding, what Ethan and her had kind of come to an agreement on. Go where I say, kill who I say, do the damage, and none of the soldiers have to bleed. It's just him doing what he needs to do. But there's a person that has a problem with this, and that happens to be Amanda Waller, who's not only running Task Force X, but Task Force XL, which is a very different interpretation of this. Or it could be perceived as Task Force 11, I guess. But I'm going to go with Task Force XL, because you've got Giganta and a whole bunch of other stuff, people like Solomon Grundy and the Parasite, a lot of really overpowered people. And ultimately, in the end, we find that Ethan has reverted back to his normal form, so he's not going to be damaged for another 24 hours. And that's probably where the story is going to speed up a little bit. But if we're talking about Damage, and Damage as an introduction into the DC New Age of Heroes, I think that it's very clear that this is an artist-driven series. The art is the primary focal point for everything that I have seen out of this. The story seems to not necessarily come second in it, but it doesn't necessarily seem like it was written with that same strong premise of trying to tell the story. And for people that are familiar with a lot of different comic books, it could be a situation where you feel like it's a Hulk ripoff, or it's some other kind of, rehashing of a very familiar story, except in a slightly different context. I'm a little bit more inclined to give it its due and really see where it kind of unfolds from there, because this is the first, when we're talking about New Age of Heroes, it's the first real major launch of brand new titles and new characters from DC in years. So it's something to be monitored and to see what kind of success they get out of it. It's not an indication of what's going to be coming out of the other books, simply because you've got other entirely different creative teams that are working on very different topics and trying to deal with very different subject matter. But I think Damage is, it's not necessarily a strong start, but it's something that's going to keep my interest for the next 2 or 3 issues, just so I can suss out where it's going to really be going from here. I mean, you don't just stop reading a book after the first chapter, or, maybe you do. But I want to know what you guys think too, so hit me up in the comments down below so we can start that conversation. As always, if you like what you see, hit the like button. Don't forget to subscribe to get more news, reviews, and commentary about comic books, comic book movies, comic book TV shows and games, and anything and everything inside the world of comics.